Hello, once again, everyone. Welcome to Scott Schilling Speaks. I'm your host, Scott Schilling, and it's going to be fun because I was on this gentleman's podcast just the other day, and so it seemed turnabout was fair play. Obviously, I have him here. He is a speaker, a trainer, a coach, a podcast host. He's an expert on influence and persuasion. Johnny Ball, thanks for joining us here at Scott
Hi,
Schilling
Scott.
Speaks.
I'm really happy to be joining you. Great to speak with you again.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun the other day when we were talking about
It
everything. Now
was.
I get to reverse the roles. I get to ask the questions.
Yeah, you're in charge this time, Scott.
That's exactly it. So, what takes you into what gets you so excited about the field of presenting and influence and persuasion? Let's just lay it all out.
Oh, well, a few different things there, because I mean, although they're related, for me, they're different things. So what gets me excited about speaking and presenting particularly is something that I never really thought I could do. Now, I have a dramatic past, and by that, I just mean I liked drama. I liked doing theatre and stuff when I was at university and things. I love performing. You know, I'm at heart, I'm a musician. There's an actor in me somewhere, and you know, I love being on the stage. I love entertaining people. I like making people laugh as well and things like that. At some point, I realized acting wasn't going to be the career for me. I wasn't really pretty enough to get the kind of work that I wanted to get and things like that. And also, it's a tough industry, and I wasn't really prepared to do it. But when I realized that I could be on stages myself and I could talk and actually help people and transform lives or give people food for thought and things to think about, that really appealed to me. And I thought, yeah, this is the kind of performance I like. It's actually making a difference. Not that entertainment can't make a difference as well, but this was specifically going out there with the intention of making things better, helping people out. And that got me really excited. The influence and persuasion stuff is a little bit different. And so whilst I really love it and get passionate about it, I didn't necessarily relate it to public speaking and presentation skills when I first started, although it is a part of it. I discovered some stuff around marketing. And the thing that first got me into all this was a book by a guy called Mark Joyner, if you've ever heard of Mark.
Yeah,
and he wrote a book called Mind Control Marketing. And so it was from reading that book that said, there's all this stuff that's like hidden under the surface and we don't know it's there. And being a bit of a buff on psychology and very interested in that, I found it fascinating. Like all the stuff that makes us tick, all the things that get us operating under the surface that are affecting us and we don't always have awareness of is really interesting. I went on to read Cialdini's book on influence and persuasion and much more besides. But I just find the whole area incredibly fascinating. I got into studying rhetoric and all sorts of things that I'd never come across before. And of course, it ties in very well, very significantly with presentation work, with public speaking, even with podcasting. And so that's what I talk about. That's what I love because it is my passion. I spent years studying this stuff now and get very excited that I'm allowed to get up on the stages, virtual and real, to speak to people about it.
So you're over in Europe. Are there stages available these days over there, or are we in the virtual world?
Yeah, some. So there are some physical stages, like actual meetings are happening again now. In terms of physical events, people are still a bit reluctant to go back to them. So although they are allowed, you can have them. People generally don't seem to want them just yet. People don't feel very confident about coming back to big conference style events and things like that, it seems anyway. So most of the offers that I'm getting to speak and talk about are virtual stages and podcasts as well. So I think this is definitely still the time to be doing all that kind of work.
So you've got multiple podcasts, right?
I have had. I only have one active at the moment.
Okay.
One's on hiatus and one got deleted because it was an experiment.
Well, that's what we had talked about it the other day, and I like in a passing comment, I thought you said something about two, and I was like, but I only see the support for one. Now I understand that. That makes sense. What do you like about podcasting? What's the draw there for you?
Well, you know what? I started a podcast back in 2012. And so early days, really, for podcasting. I know there were people podcasting before that, but I did maybe about 5, 6 episodes, maybe more, but it certainly didn't last very long. And a lot of that's because I was doing it on my own. I didn't really know much about podcasting, and it was maybe too early to really see the potential for it.
Sure.
So it just kind of seemed like, excuse me, it just kind of seemed like it was putting stuff out there that hardly anyone was ever going to see or download. And so I didn't stick with it. I got pod fade very early on. But I came back to it as a Toastmasters project towards the end of 2019. I thought, well, let's give that a go again. I really enjoyed it before, but I didn't stick with it. But let's do something different this time.
Right.
And so I did my first show. I got a friend from my Toastmasters club to come and record an episode with me, and really had fun doing it, and decided I would do some more. And that's just what got the ball rolling. And I pushed through the pod fade this time.
So how many episodes do you have in the can these days?
I just recently now published over 100 episodes of Speaking Influence, which is my main show.
Very nice. That's awesome. So, I mean, I enjoy them just because of the conversations and what you learn through the process.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you learn about business opportunities. You learn about just a variety of different things.
I had no idea what I was getting into with podcasting, to be honest with you. And if I could go back now and tell myself then what I know now, it would be a very different experience. You know, there would be no getting pod fade or wanting to quit, because I know what's coming up. That you really do have to stick with it and play the long game. But in terms of the connections that I've made with some amazing people, some of whom have now become very good friends, and the knowledge that I've learned, and enough knowledge in over 100 episodes now to write several books from stuff I've learned just from those episodes.
Certainly.
And like you say, having great conversations, sharing with amazing people, and putting good content out into the world. And this is the thing, is like, you could do it just for the sake of doing it, but hopefully podcasters care about the quality of the content they're putting out there and want to put out something that's worth listening to.
So what makes a podcast worth listening to?
Well, I think good information is a start for me. And it depends on the kind of podcast, right? I mean, I do mainly interview-based podcasts that are sort of in the business and entrepreneurial space, probably much like yourself. People who are in business are going to be interested in it. So mainly professional people, but it could be for people who are outside of that as well and just have an interest in the subject matter. But that is primarily who it's aimed at. But there are many podcasts that are aimed for people outside of professional situations as well. So I mean, I'm really talking in terms of the professional world and the business side of podcasting. That's a great way to connect with people and help. So what makes a good show there is having guests who know what they're talking about. So not just bringing anyone on your show, people who can actually talk with some expertise about something, who can tell their experience, their stories. They've got stuff to share. They're not fresh out the barn, and they can really give you an idea of things. You're gonna come away knowing more than you came in with, and that's what I want for it. I think a bit of fun as well, a bit of lightness. It doesn't always have to be jokes all the time, but just a bit of lightness, a bit of playfulness sometimes can make a show much more entertaining. And really what I want when I listen to a podcast is just a really interesting conversation to listen into.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've obviously gone through and continue to go through some very unique times.
Yeah.
Again, you're over in Europe, we're here in the States. Even within the States, we've got different rules and different things going on. What has it been like from a business standpoint, trying to keep up with the changes in the rules that are being placed on both business and personal lives?
Well, I can only really talk to my own personal experience, and the biggest effect that it's had on me has been that there were a couple of weeks where I had to work from home. Like the quarantine level was so high that the only people who were even allowed to leave their home other than to go for essential shopping were people in the supply chain or people in essential services. And so for me, that meant I couldn't really justify leaving home and going to the office. So for 2 weeks, I had to work from home. That was probably the biggest negative impact from me. And even then, just made it work and treated it like just something a bit different. I knew it wasn't going to last. But in terms of client work and things like that, nearly everything I do is online. So apart from some live events, which obviously weren't happening, nearly everything started to switch to virtual right away. The only big downside probably everyone experienced was just being in Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. Now, I already did a lot of Zoom meetings, and suddenly I had double the amount of Zoom meetings that I ever had before. And so that started getting very wary. But I'm also very aware that those are very minor problems compared to what so many people have had to deal with all that. So I can, I can chin up and put up with it for a while.
So where do we go from here? You've got, we've got a changing environment. We've got changing rules. We don't have the live events to depend on these days. Do we pursue more virtual events, or what are the business tips at this time? It's so strange out there.
Live events will come back, and I'm already starting to see it. I've been invited to a speaking event that's going to be it's going to be a hybrid event. They're going to have a big online part of it, and they're going to have a live part. So there was an option to speak live or to speak virtually. I think that's how things are going to continue. I see it generally as a good thing that recent times have pushed everybody online more. And whilst there's some downsides to that for sure, the upside is, in terms of those of us who want to have more reach and get our message across, it's much easier to do that when you can do that to an online audience. They don't have to travel, they don't have to book hotels, they just have to show up. And so whilst that has the downsides of, well, they can be distracted by anything else that's going on in their personal environment, it's so much easier to actually get people into your online environment than into a physical environment as well. So I think there's some big advantages that we can take there. And I think that's the future. I don't think virtual events are going anywhere. I don't think podcasts are going anywhere. I mean, this event has these events have pushed people into doing more podcasts, like more and more podcasts have started. I'm sure a lot of them have stopped once people have started returning back to work and things, or at least slowed down. But many, many more are starting, and awareness is increased about podcasts now. And a lot more very well-known people have gotten into podcasting as well. So more and more people are coming to podcasting to follow the people who they already follow on other platforms or on TV and film, so that they can hear them in podcasts and maybe even potentially connect with them in some way. And that also means that they're going to potentially be exposed to other kinds of podcasting. Oh, hey, there's pretty much a podcast for everything. So I'm sure I can find some other things that would be of interest to me.
Yeah, I think I was reading an article yesterday. I believe it said something 1.7 something million podcasts.
I think it's more than that now. It's over 2 million now, I believe.
That's what I was trying to think of the date of the article.
It wasn't that long ago. So I mean, I doubt the article is from that long ago, but now it's over 2 million. However, it gets pointed out that if you start looking into the statistics of it, probably somewhere around 50 to 70%, only 50 to 75% of that number are active podcasts.
Oh, really? Okay. So that it's people who have gone out there and stuck their toe in the water and lost a toe.
Well, the podcasts have been around for a long time. So a lot of podcasts have run the course. I should say it's 50 to 75,000 of those are active rather than percent. But yeah, many of them have run the course that they started years ago, or the hosts have moved on to different shows, different things. Some of them have had pod fade. They show, because the figures still include shows that may have only done a couple of episodes and quit.
Sure.
You know? And so unless somebody pulls the stuff offline, they just stay up there as podcasts. But when you think there's of 75,000, if there's something like 75,000 podcasts that are active, that's nothing in comparison to like YouTube channels and things like that.
So what would you suggest to somebody if they come to you and say, you know, Johnny, I'm thinking about doing a podcast? What advice do you give them?
My general advice, first of all, is, well, why do they want to do it? Because I think a lot of people, they think they can go into podcasting and they're going to make money from it. They're going to be the next Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss or whoever else, and they're going to start having advertisers knocking on the door. And the realities are very different. So most podcasts are not making any money. Most podcasters are doing it for the love of doing it, or hoping that at some point they can do it. And whilst monetization opportunities have increased and there's more ways to monetize shows now, it's a very bad reason to start a podcast, because it's such a long game. So my best advice for anyone who's thinking about it, I think whilst it can be very beneficial, start trying your hand at being a guest on some shows, because then you're going to get a feel for whether it is right for you and what your style of doing a podcast would be and what you want it to look and sound like. And also you get in with some of the podcasting communities, because I think most podcasters start their shows without having the first clue what they're doing. I certainly did. And so it's been a huge learning curve. Whereas now more people are starting their shows with a bit of knowledge and some help, and people who are clued up on this and can give you a head start into getting into this world that can cut months, even maybe some years off your podcast journey to download figures and some level of success and monetization.
So when you say long game, what does that equate to? What?
Well, I think it takes, most people reckon it takes about 2 years at least to start getting any kind of downloads and significance that's worthwhile as a podcaster, unless you have a lot of money to throw at promoting it, or unless you already have a big online following, a big email list and the likes. And even then, even with big email lists, if they're not into podcasts, they may still not come and listen to you on a podcast. So it takes a long time to build audience for most people. And the vast majority of people don't have the patience. What's good now that wasn't really there so much when I started off, and maybe you have some experience with this, but it was very hard to get guests when I first started. So a lot of time it was me contacting people I was connected to, or just reaching out to people who I knew of. Either I'd read their books or heard a talk on YouTube or TED Talk or something like that by them. And so I was exploiting my own contact list a bit. And then I got put into it's like an online email group with guests and hosts who were, you know, exchanging shows that were advertising for guests and guests who wanted to be on shows. And so some guy was doing like a weekly email list for connecting people up. And so it's only more recently with sites like Podmatch, Podbooker, Matchmaker FM, things like that, that it's so easy now to find guests for your show. And, you know, it's the least of my problems. Finding people to be on the show is the least of my problems.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do it a little bit differently, but I think I'm going to go to some of those services too. One of the things that I've shared with many of my guests is that for me, it's really about them. You know, how can I lift them up and do whatever? So, you know, at one time when I was doing a studio show, you know, that had a significant expense to it and things like that, you'd have to be very particular as to who your guests were, right? Because you got a lot of money invested into them. So what's the most interesting guest you've ever had on your podcast?
Well, it depends how you define interesting. So interesting to me personally, there's a few, some that have stood out for me. One was recent with a guy called Dan French, Dr. Dan French, who's a doctor of rhetoric. And so we had a deep dive into what rhetoric is all about and how that works as a tool of influence and persuasion. My most downloaded episodes ever, so far at least, is with a political speechwriter called Simon Lancaster, who has several really excellent TEDx talks about rhetoric and language of influence and persuasion, and speaking about this. He was a great guest. It turned out he hadn't ever done a podcast before. So it was his first time being a guest on a podcast. And I guess that was a lucky break for me. But, in terms of, there was one episode that, whilst I love all my episodes, I find all my guests interesting. One episode where I was captivated was with the Stoic philosopher Donald Robertson. And I was receiving a masterclass on Stoicism, and it was just such a wonderful discussion. It's one of those episodes I could have gone on for hours. And if he'd had the time and the will to do it, we would have done it, I think.
That's cool. It's interesting to hear because, you have your favorites for a variety of reasons. Like you say, some are pure content and some are just fun, just to hear people's stories and the craziness.
Some are interesting just because they're downright weird, and sometimes those don't get published. I will be honest about that. There are some episodes that will never see the light of day. But
really,
yeah,
what can be divulged without
without landing myself in some hot water? So I'm a very sort of science and practical kind of guy. So when I have had some guests who've been getting really out there and a bit woo-woo, or a bit like a bit super evangelical about whatever they believe in, I don't want that going out on my show. It's not what I'm about. And I've also had some guests who just either incapable of directly answering a question, which is hard to imagine, or don't seem to be able to come to a point that is of any interest or value, or just give really curt, blunt answers. One guy who was like that was just really like getting blood out of a rock, was a podcaster himself. I was like, I can't believe that he's just kind of giving me these, like not even trying to have any rapport, just giving me these really short answers. And we were done in probably about 20 minutes, and I normally do a 45-minute show. So I thought, okay, we are done. I'm okay with that. Let's finish
one
there.
and two word answers do not go very long. For sure.
But I don't know how any podcaster, any self-respecting podcaster, could think that was okay. But there you go.
Well, I think that's interesting because, not. And I don't know that there are any particular rules to podcasting, right?
Sure.
How to do it. I think that there are some great media coaches who teach folks to take a question, answer it fairly succinctly. Right?
Who is going to tune into a podcast though where the answers are just like yes, no, maybe, without much exposition? No, it's not very interesting.
Well, either that way or the other way, that it's a run-on diatribe of dribble, that just keeps on going. So I agree with that. Like I say, I find these to be fun and interesting just to get to know people and what they're doing. So, and I don't know where I was going.
Well, what do you think is the most important thing about being a podcast host?
Well, for me, I do it really because I want to help people get their messages out. I mean, that's my motivation. I have always wanted people to, there are times in my career where I've wanted people to offer a hand up, can you help a brother out? Can you do a little something here,
right?
That helps share my expertise, my offers, my whatever, right? And so I guess I'm at a stage where I want to be that tool for other people. Obviously I'm involved. I'm here too, right? So somebody's going to get a feeling for my style or my whatever. I am a coach and a trainer and a speaker and all those things as well. But I mean, my motivation is really to help other people get their message out. And I mean, I think if you want that to be the way the world is, you've got a place to start, right? You can be the starter of that. And so for me, that's, like I said, I've had Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, both friends that have sold more books. The only book that has sold more than they have is the Bible, right?
Right.
Good friends, both done multiple shows, and fascinating. I would go back to, if anybody's listening, go to those shows because they're fascinating shows. But I've also had the mom from East Texas that homeschools her daughter, that makes a little bit of money in her multi-level marketing company and just lives a happy life, to share that. So I think that, the perspective of everybody has a story. This training I was just on, I said, the one thing that differentiates you from anybody else is your story. Nobody can ever replicate it. Nobody will take it away from you. Just get good at your story, and I think that there's some very interesting stories, that sometimes I think people don't believe that you could live in a small town, homeschool your kids, not do much of nothing, quote unquote, big, and have a happy life.
Yeah.
I mean, how about you? Why do you do what you do?
I feel like I have a mission in the world, and that my mission is to empower people. And the way that I best do that is by helping people learn and understand the psychology and application of influence and persuasion through presentation skills, public speaking, and other aspects to help them get their important messages out in the world, much as similarly to yourself. But also really as a tool to understand that a lot of people who are already in positions high up the ladder already know these things. They already know how to utilize these tools. And a lot of the time they are being used to keep other voices down and to silence dissent and to stay on top of the pile. And so I see this as being an armory, if you like, of helping people to not just be able to wield the truth out in the world and put good things out there, but also to defend themselves against bad ideas and bad influence and persuasion when it's being done on them, to recognize it and to be able to hopefully defend against it.
I'm glad you said that, actually, because that's a big part when people talk persuasion and influence and things like that. I created my own heart-centered selling definition of sales being education through communication without manipulation. And I have always found the manipulation word is the one that people object to, right? Yeah. And so from a sales standpoint, from a presentation, every sale is a presentation, every presentation is a sale, right? Education through communication makes you a teacher, and it reframes the thought process from the beginning, and there's a different feeling there. And I think sometimes when people hear the word influence or persuasion, they're immediately jump to the M word, manipulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
How can you go and influence and persuade without manipulating?
It's all about intention, really, isn't it? So if it coming from a good place, the way you can tell, I think, or at least hopefully try to tell, is to ask yourself what the other person's intention is. And we can always get a sense of that. Now, some situations you can directly ask them. You can ask them, what is your intention here? What's the goal? What's the outcome? You may or may not get an answer to it, but you can always ask yourself that question. And I can think of probably the first time I ever did was before I even learned any of this stuff. And I was in a situation at a big event where there was a lot of emotional manipulation going on, emotional stories, swelling music, all things that were really designed to manipulate people's emotion and elicit a certain response. And just by doing that, I took a step back and thought, oh, what's going on here is not cool. This is utter manipulation, because there's no information here. It's all emotion. It's all like triggering things, pushing buttons for people, and aiming to elicit responses, but not in a healthy way. It's more of a, well, look, everyone else is doing it, so you do it and go along with it. Let's get you into a high emotional state, and you're going to agree with everything, and you're going to buy into whatever we're selling you. And I honestly, in that first time, I had to step away from the event. I had to go outside because I needed to get some air. It felt so toxic to me. Yeah. And I think that was one of the things for me that really started to trigger that whole journey into really feeling that I needed to understand how that stuff worked and what we could do about it.
Excellent answer. And I totally agree with you. It's about intention and everything like that. And that's why the people who are good at it and authentic with it, I love, and the people who are the manipulators, I disdain. Just not who I am, not who I ever want to be, nor associate with. So.
Yeah, I'll add this as well. You know, there have been some things. I've been in the personal development industry for a long time, and I'm a bit of a rarity in personal development in that I'm not really into spirituality and sort of beliefs. A lot of the more woo-woo belief things that are out there as well. It's just not who I am, not what I'm about. And so that makes me kind of rare in personal development. But what I do like is psychology and stuff that has been well practiced and well researched. And so that's what I want to put out there and share with people. And so it's hard. I'm a bit of an outlier. It's hard being a bit of an outlier, but I feel it's really important to be in that space and be a different voice, and not to be against anyone else, because I don't think that really helps, but just to be a voice for, there are other choices here. There are other ways of thinking about things. And that's what I want. I want people to think about things, to consider different perspectives, and to not necessarily just take other people's words for it or assume that someone else is an authority in something. There's a lot of that, and a lot of people are falling for cons, of being deceived because of all sorts of reasons, because they think they want something. You do have to look at people's integrity in the industry as well. And I know some of the people I've worked with in the past, in long past, thankfully, turned out to not have such great integrity. They weren't really, they're one thing on stage and very different off the stage. And who you spend time with, who you hang around with is important, because believe me, even though they might be doing great work and they might be helping people, their whole energy is going to be pulling in other people who are like that as well. And they ultimately, if they haven't resolved those sorts of things within themselves, they are going to find stuff coming back to bite them as well. So pretending to have it all figured out and sorted is really dangerous.
Absolutely excellent. I totally agree with you. Couldn't agree more. How do people get a hold of you?
Anyone who wants to check me out, I recommend visiting my website, presentinfluence.com. You'll find a quiz there for how to find out how influential and persuasive you are. You'll find some links to some of my programs. You'll also find articles, videos, and links to my podcast episodes there. That's the best place. And my social links if you want to connect with me on social media.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here today. Greatly appreciate this.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks everybody for joining us here at Scott Schilling Speaks. We'll see you again tomorrow, exact same time. God bless.